to the party people who were brainwashed, were led to believe, and they did believe, that Stalin is God, that couldn't make any mistake. Everything he did was infallible. Suddenly, their faith, their religion collapsed.
Poland was fertile territory for Radio Free Europe's message. Stalinist policies had brought Polish workers close to revolt. After years of shortages and hard work, they wanted change. In June 1956, workers in Poznan demanded bread, liberty, and freedom for the Roman Catholic Church, and above all, an end to the Soviet domination of Poland. The demonstrators were met with Polish tanks and Polish bullets. 74 people were killed. Young protesters faced a show trial to which foreign journalists were invited.
What really shocked the government, the regime, was that it was the workers who rose. It was not the people that they were afraid of. It was not the sort of intellectuals. It was not people involved in politics. It was real workers, and they were disgusted. So that was a terrible blow to the regime.
The uprising in Poznan fueled the spirit of rebellion. Backed by Polish workers, reformers in the Communist Party made ever more radical demands. Some even called for the withdrawal of Soviet troops. The reformers turned to Władysław Gomulka, a patriotic communist imprisoned under Stalin. Without consulting the Kremlin, Polish communists chose him as their new leader. Fearful of an anti-Russian revolt, Moscow ordered Soviet troops to advance on Warsaw, and Khrushchev flew to Poland to teach Gomulka who was boss.
We were both horrified and amused because he behaved in a very strange way. He was running around and shaking his fist. He accused us of wanting to break away and said they wouldn't allow it. He was behaving very badly.
While Gomulka and Khrushchev argued, Soviet troops positioned themselves, ready to strike. America looked on.
You're about to see the Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, face the nation with questions from veteran correspondents representing the nation's press.
On the 17th of June, 1953, Mr. Secretary, the people of East Germany rose against the communist regime, and the Russians were able to come in and suppress the uprising by means of armed force. We, at that time, sat back and allowed this to happen. Would we sit back again in a similar fashion if this kind of uprising were to take place in Poland?
Well, I do not think that we would send our own armed forces into Poland or into East Germany under those circumstances. I doubt if that would be a profitable or desirable thing to do. It would be the last thing in the world that these people who are trying to win their independence would want. That would precipitate a full-scale world war, and probably the result of that would be all these people would be wiped out.
Because he had the backing of the Polish army and the Polish people, Gomulka won his argument with Khrushchev. Gomulka promised that Poland would remain a loyal member of the Warsaw Pact. In return, he secured greater freedom of action in Polish domestic affairs. As Soviet troops were ordered back to barracks, Gomulka addressed the people.
W ciągu ubiegłych lat nagromadziło się w życiu Polski wiele zła, wiele nieprawości i bolesnych rozczarowań. Idee socjalizmu, przeniknięte duchem wolności człowieka i poszanowania praw obywatela, w praktyce ulegały głębokim wypaczeniom. Słowa nie znajdowały pokrycia w rzeczywistości.
Gomulka's promise of a freer, more Polish nation calmed the demonstrators.
Gomulka mi opowiadał, że parę lat potem
Gomulka told me a few years later that he had a conversation with Soviet Marshal Zhukov, who had been drinking.
siedział obok Gomulki i
Zhukov said, "We were so well prepared that we could have been all over Poland in 3 days.
miał trochę po rosyjsku.
We had very detailed plans."
Myśmy byli tak przygotowani, że w ciągu 3 dni byśmy wszystko u was opanowali.
And Gomulka replied, "Did you plan how many people on both sides would have perished?"
Również ile będzie ofiar po obu stronach.
Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin zászlaja alatt előre a béke a népek szabadságának szent ügyéért.
After Stalin's death, Hungary had remained under the ruthless dictatorship of Matyas Rákosi.
It was a saying at that time, it was like a joke. There's only 3 kinds of people in Hungary: who was in jail, who is in jail, and who will be in jail for political reasons.
Like Stalin, Rákosi killed and imprisoned his rivals, but people were expected to cheer and conform. The new Kremlin leadership disapproved of Rákosi. A senior Soviet official was sent to deal with him.
2 hét múlva jött Mikoyan, az őrmény.
Mikoyan, the Armenian wheeler dealer, arrived.
Rákosival mentünk ki Rákosért.
Rákosi and I went to meet him at the airport and took him back by car.
És hoztuk be Mikoyan. Már majdnem beértünk.
We were almost at the guest house when Mikoyan turned to Rákosi and said, "The Soviet leadership has decided you are ill."
Úgy döntött, hogy maga beteg.
Well, Rákosi didn't think he was ill. But of course, in those days, illness was a political decision. Mikoyan continued, "You will need treatment in Moscow, so you will have to resign."
The Soviets allowed András Hegedűs to remain prime minister. But reformers in the Hungarian Communist Party sought a leader more independent from Moscow. They wanted Imre Nagy to take over. Like Gomulka in Poland, Nagy was seen as a leader who would reform the party. The Soviet embassy in Budapest was uneasy.
Ambassador Andropov sensed the possible danger and warned Moscow. He sent a lot of telegrams, he made phone calls, and even went to Moscow himself. He tried to warn everybody, but it was all in vain. Khrushchev thought he could cope with the situation.
Inspired by Gomulka's success in Poland, thousands poured into the streets of Budapest. Students and workers demanded free speech, the disbanding of the secret police, and the withdrawal of Soviet troops. They paraded Hungarian flags with the communist emblem torn out.
I was stopped halfway across Margit Bridge by women students. One of them asked me for my army cap. She pinned the Hungarian national colours to it and thrust a leaflet into my hand. It contained 14 demands. I could agree with 13 of these demands, but I couldn't agree with the 14th, which called for the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary. This was a demand which we couldn't possibly achieve.
The demonstrators carried portraits of Imre Nagy. Communist reformers urged him to take charge.
Imre Nagy was suddenly taken from his home to the parliament, and he had spoke of some minutes. He began saying, "Comrades," and then the crowd roared and said, "We are not comrades."
Nagy had misjudged the popular mood. Hungarians wanted immediate and radical change. In the center of Budapest, an excited crowd toppled the monument to Stalin. Nagy stayed silent when Hungary's tottering communist leadership called on the Kremlin to crush the growing unrest.
I got a telephone call from my divisional commander in Segled. He told me, "You've got to go to Budapest. It's urgent." I asked, "What are my orders?" I was told that orders would be given when I arrived in the city. We were approaching the city as dusk fell. We thought that all that was needed was a show of force. Then I heard a machine gun open fire and the screams of a man who was wounded or dying. Then I realized that things were going to get serious.
Armed civilians had prevented Soviet tank reinforcements from entering Budapest.